Have you ever noticed that the tile yields in Civ 6 are greater near the equator? It's not just you. The tiles really are better in the center of the map. This is because of how Firaxis designed forest generation in Civ 6. When generating a new map, the game first places down all of the landforms such as hills, mountains, and rivers, and then afterwards populates the map with forests. Regular woods tiles are placed first, covering around 15 to 20% of the map, assuming that the standard rainfall setting is used during game setup. Afterwards, the game covers 35 to 40% of the empty tiles along the equator, defined as the middle 15% of the map, with rainforest tiles. As a result, the total amount of forested land is far higher in the middle of the map. This results in better tile yields and more droppable features when the mid-game rolls around. That brings us to the topic of today's video, the Better Balanced Starts mod, which is almost universally used in competitive Civ 6, just pushed out an experimental update. This update seeks to balance the number of forested tiles so that the equator is no longer the best part of the map. Instead of 60% forest coverage at the center of the map and 20% elsewhere, the game would instead have 35% forest coverage worldwide. However, the question arises, is this really such a good idea? It may seem like a strange question to ask, as the changes seem very intuitive at first. Civ 6 is a game with a lot of randomness, which can result in frustrations when some players spawn much better than others. Spreading forests more evenly across the map should result in more balanced spawns, leading to a more competitive experience where a player's spawn location isn't as impactful. However, this is an overly simplistic view of the changes. Let's explore the reasons why. First off, civs have historically been balanced around the old forest and rainforest spawning behavior. Civs that have spawn biases that push them towards the equator, such as Brazil, Maya, and Congo, will generally suffer from the new changes. In particular, Maya is in a pretty underwhelming state right now following a recent wave of nerfs in the Better Balanced Game mod. So having the Better Balanced Starts mod gang up on it to nerf it even harder just seems overly cruel. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are some civs that actually stand to benefit from the forest balancing update. For instance, Canada, Russia, and Sweden all have spawn biases that force them towards the outer edges of the map. These civs can expect a substantial increase in the amount of woods tiles in their vicinity, which will greatly accelerate their games. In particular, Canada might be a little too strong with these changes. Prior to the update, the tundra had roughly 20% forest coverage. After the update, however, the tundra has a whopping 35% forest coverage. Not only will Canada have higher tile yields and more chops, one must also consider that Canada already gains bonus yields on lumber mill tiles. Suddenly, the flat, barren stretches of tundra which Canada struggled to utilize are a thing of the past. Furthermore, all of the extra woods tiles increase the natural appeal of the land, which plays into Canada's strategy of spamming national parks with their unique unit. Speaking of increased appeal, the bull moose persona of Theodore Roosevelt is eating good with these changes. This civ has a well-known unique opening strategy, where players open the game with the Earth Goddess Pantheon and a preserve in their first 3 cities, in order to maximize the extra yields granted on appealing tiles by their civ bonuses. With the new update, there are more woods than before, which means pockets of high appeal are easier to come by. However, rainforest tiles creep further north and south than they used to, and these tiles actually reduce appeal. This civ is still by no means consistent, but it's definitely a bit better after the update than it was before. Okay, so some civs may need to be rebalanced around the new forest update. However, if we wrangle in the outliers with some compensatory buffs and nerfs, surely there's no problem anymore, right? Well, not exactly. To understand why, let's talk about a game mode this channel doesn't cover very often, Teamers. In contrast to Free-For-All, Teamers is a format of multiplayer Civ 6 where 2 teams of players, usually either 4 or 5 members each, compete against each other in a permanent state of war. In these games, there's 2 different types of spawns. A frontline spawn and a backline spawn. Frontline spawns refer to when a player starts the game fairly close to another player from the enemy team. This will almost always result in some early to mid-game aggression as the 2 civs spam whatever units they can at each other. A backline spawn, in contrast, is one in which there are no enemy civs close enough for any early aggression to take place. As a result, these players get to focus on building up their stats as much as possible while only needing to build a minimal standing army, and usually don't end up entering the fray until much later into the game. What this forest balancing change does is upset the balance between frontline and backline civs. The logic goes as follows. Players who spawn near the equator are far more likely to be on the front line, and as such, they have higher tile yields and more chops to compensate for their games being slowed down by early war. Civs who spawn far from the equator are typically on the back line, and as such, they can outpace the players who spawn near the equator even though they have worse tiles. Furthermore, the extra woods and rainforests near the equator create more defensible terrain that can prolong wars and help frontline players stay relevant for longer. Changing the map generation scripts such that forests are equally as common at every latitude will unduly increase the influence that backline players have on the game. This could result in more games where it feels like nothing the frontline players do matters. They just spam units at each other for 70 turns, and then whichever team's backline plays better gets to come in and clean up the middle of the map with helicopters. Even in free-for-all games, the advantage of spawning in the center of the map has always been questionable. If we look at the CPL Season 1 free-for-all finals, which were played between the top 10 rated players in the server, we can see that the game initially started swinging in the favor of the players who spawned along the equator. For a while, it seemed as though Babylon was taking over the game. Eventually, however, the inherent flaw of spawning in the center of the map revealed itself, as they ended up getting double-teamed by Australia from the east and Gaul from the west. In the end, it was a civ who spawned near the southern tundra, Gaul, who ended up taking the win. So, now that we have all of the necessary background information, we can return to examining the forced balancing changes with a fresh perspective. Suddenly, the entire premise of the changes is called into question. Should the edges of the map really have the same quality of tiles as the center of the map? There's already an inherent downside to spawning near the center of the map, is there not? For the moment, it's important to keep in mind that these changes are still experimental, and at present they can still be toggled on or off during game setup. So, what do you think? Do you think these changes should go through as they are? Do you think they should be entirely thrown out, or do you think there's a workable middle ground solution? Let me know in the comments below. That's all for this video. Herson, signing out.